Well, my father, he was a pretty strict man, a bit irritable and could be overbearing at times. He was a bit domineering. He didn't really listen to people, and when he wanted his way, he was really stubborn about it. So it could be a bit frustrating being around him at times. But despite his flaws, uh, he was rough around the edges, but he had trouble, and he wasn't always so lovable. But he meant well for us, even though he wasn't very good at showing it. And despite his flaws, he had a lot of good traits as well that I admired as a kid. He was a man of God. He was hardworking and very principled. There's a million different ways I could have turned out because of my childhood, but I've always been well behaved and hardworking, and I learned most of that from watching him. Now, there obviously he's made many mistakes in his life, but when I become a father, I've made it my goal not to repeat the same mistakes he did. And there's a quote that I want to share that I feel like carries a lot of truth. It's that every child either wants to become like his father or nothing like him. And of course, it's not to that extreme. It's not a black and white situation, but every child sees the good and bad in their parents, and they want to carry the good parts and leave behind the bad parts. And I think growing up is about learning to recognize those bad characteristics in your parents, uh, and then discarding them. And even though we might, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do, because even though we don't like to admit it or realize it, it's the bad characteristics that really stick with us as we grow up. It's basically at 13 years old when I started living without a father. And without a father in the household, is much different. Kind of like leaves a hole. And like with any void, your first reaction is try to fill it. So without having a father in the household, it really forces you to grow up a bit. You know, and then and also leaves a big hole in the whole family dynamic. Men and women parent very differently. You know, women more attentive to your child's need, more empathetic and gentle. But then there's men who are more strict. You know, you bring tough love, but also discipline. So both of them bring balance, and I think that's what a healthy relationship is. And there's a saying that too much of anything is harmful. So helping a child too much is harmful. Being too kind to a child is harmful. Being too strict with them is harmful. You know, any healthy relationship needs balance, and that's why a child needs both the mother and the father. They both bring to the table different but equally important values, and they provide what the other can't, and also provide the check when one parent's in excess. And without the symmetry, it's likely that the child experiences one form of parenting excess and then a deficit in the other. And it's just really unhealthy and leads to missing out on certain skills. You know, while your mother tries to protect you from the world, the father wants to prepare you for it. And I think you need both to have a healthy dynamic and really develop. Because even though my mother has done a wonderful job, uh, provided for all of us, made sure we behaved and taught us a lot, uh, a woman can't replace a father because a woman can teach a child to be a man?
I grew up with my father. He was always involved in my life, always actively involved and supportive. Anytime I had an event, he would always show up. Anytime I had an art show, he would always show up. He was a hard worker, but I understand even now more so the importance of the role that he played in my life, and the fact that a lot of people, especially in the African American community, a lot of men, a lot of boys growing up don't have that. And I realize how valuable that's been to my confidence and self-esteem in a lot of areas. And I had a lot of friends, a lot of guy friends who didn't have their fathers in their life. And I see kind of certain commonalities amongst them that I was a little bit different in. And I recognize that him being in my life kind of made that difference. There was a disrespect or a disregard towards women for the guys who didn't have fathers. On the other hand, my dad taught me to honor and respect women. He taught me to and just cherish who women are and what a woman's role is in my life. And the older I get, I realize there's good and bad that you receive from your parents. And I'm like the older I get, he has a passion for learning and a passion for studying and a passion for growing, but also that comes with, it could sometimes come with arrogance, like a unwillingness to admit when you're wrong. And at a certain point, I realized I was doing that, and I recognized that it's from a fear of being seen a certain way or seen as incompetent or just unable. And I would never want to come off like that, or never, there's an insecurity of not wanting to seem like I don't know what I'm doing or know what I'm talking about. How to be a better partner for my wife and how to be a better husband, father, all of that. I want to keep sharpening on myself, never become stagnant and never become just comfortable. There's a point when you can become too comfortable and I gotta do this, gotta do that. And you don't actively seek how to, seek the Lord and how to, okay, Lord, what is your purpose for us to do today? What do you want me to do for her today? What do you want me to grow in today? We have to continually remind ourselves to seek and to chase after. Because I think after a certain point in a relationship, you lose that fire to want to chase. Like when you're interested in somebody, you're gonna chase them. Like you're gonna dress your flies. You're gonna pull out all the stops to make sure that they see that you care about them. But once you kind of have them and you know they're gonna be there for the long run, that effort stops going in. Like you start, okay, I got you. So this is what it is. But I don't believe that's the Lord's will for relationships. I believe they should always be growing and evolving and progressing. Big thing for me is when I have a son and a daughter as well, but specifically a son, a big thing for me is honor. Like I'm a stickler for honor. Whenever there's a point where people are dishonoring towards themselves, to God, and to other people, it bothers me because I don't know, there's something in me that if all else, even if you don't know a person, just honor who they are, who God created them to be. Like when you just honor them, honor their position before you even get to know somebody, because that opens the floor for love to organically grow. Especially between a man and a woman. And that's, I really want to teach my son about how to honor women and how to respect women and how to really show them their worth, even though they shouldn't receive their worth from a man, because the man isn't the one who gives them the worth. God gives them their worth. But show the woman that you understand that you understand their worth and that you respect it. Because I've I've worked with a lot of young ladies, and I see just how men and how boys are really, because that's not a man to me, somebody who's disrespectful. I see that a lot, and it really rubs me the wrong way, and it bothers me. And I take every chance I get whenever there's a teenager or a boy like who's around me, who's under my, I guess, my sphere of influence. I just teach them these things because I don't see it enough passed on. And that's what I want to pass on to my son. Identity. I struggled with not knowing whether I was, because I like growing up, I'm a not dark skin, but I'm like brown skin. And so, there was a phase when I was younger, it was like the pretty boys, the light skin is what's desirable. And growing up, I had glasses, and I actually need to get a new prescription, but I had glasses, so I had the like kind of Coke bottle shape. I was just the nerd. Like, I was just a weird kid who would draw in the corner, very introverted. And it felt like I was never good enough for anybody to like me based off my appearance. Growing up, that is a thing that a lot of kids struggle with. And I think it's kind of a misconception that only girls really deal with that, because girls deal with body image, deal with beauty standards and all that. But I think men deal with that just as much. It's just not really spoken of or admitted to. And one thing I want to instill in my son and my daughter is that they're beautiful and wonderfully made by the Lord, and the Lord sees them as beautiful. Regardless if anybody else ever tells you this, you're beautiful, and you're perfect the way you are. And your physical attributes aren't what define you. It's who you are on the inside, and that'll resonate when it comes to the out. And yeah, I want to instill true confidence in knowing that they are worth something, regardless of how people perceive them or whatever, because all that changes over the years. It's not like all that is really frivolous. I realized once I got to college, and I didn't really live on campus either, so I didn't have the social like college life like that. I didn't care. Like, after a certain point, you don't care anymore, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't really, the clothes and the just social aspects of wanting to party and all that, it never really mattered. But we make it matter when we make it matter when we're young, because it feels like the world is ending whenever something like happens, something bad happens. You make it feel tragic, but it's only from that limited perspective or worldview. But the more you see, the more you learn, the less that matters. And that's kind of what I want to teach my kids. I don't want to disregard how they feel growing up, because feelings are real, and perspectives are real. But I want to kind of enlarge their perspective as these things happen, as these things occur, so that it's not the end of the world, or it doesn't feel like the end of the world. Because I experienced a lot of depression, a lot of, not a lot, but a few moments where I wanted to take my own life. And it was as a result of me believing that it was just too big. This depression was just too big and too heavy for me to deal with. It'd be better if I just wasn't here anymore. And a lot of the stuff I never revealed to my father, a man, but prayer is just as important. And having that relationship with the Lord is just as vital. If you're gonna have a household that's run in order, and that's done the way the Lord sees fit, you have to pray, and you have to cover your household. And that's one thing I definitely believe that OSAZE kind of taught me and passed on to me. So
I'm 28 years old. I'll be 29 this year. OSA came into my life around 4th or 5th grade. He started off as my mentor. He married my mother end of 6th grade. By 7th grade, we moved in together, and I'm pretty sure that first year I spent, or that first year I spent on punishment. I was dressing for success that first semester, which meant I was in slacks and dress shoes. And then by second semester, I was in military school. I wasn't, if you ask me then, I wouldn't say that I was a quote unquote bad child or a troubled child. I would say the OSA was extremely mean in comparison to, because like growing up, I grew up with my mother, my grandmother, and my sister, and my father wasn't around. My immediate realm of influence or circle, no one's father was around. So it was kind of the norm. The way we interacted with each other was different than the way the guys who had both their parents interacted with each other. Like, clicked or dawned on me what I was watching or what was going on or what I was lacking. I didn't really realize the effect of not having a father until I was older and could actually see what was going on. And this is like well into my adulthood, well after the fact. Like, I can honestly tell you, in the very beginning, I hated OSA. Like, I hated OSA. You couldn't tell me anything about OSA that I liked. I hated OSA. I wanted nothing to do with OSA. I don't talk about OSA. Don't even say his name around me. And now he's like my best friend, interestingly enough. But so I didn't really see what I was lacking as far as discipline was concerned, because being the only boy and the baby, kind of get away with a lot. There's way more leeway, per se, for lack of better words. Those were the things I stated, from the being on punishment to the having to dress for success, the military school. Those were the negatives in my youth. I can't honestly say that I can think of any negatives now that I'm an adult, because everything that was done then seemed like it was extreme, but I understand that it had to be done, if that makes any sense. Like, OSA's method in doing things. Example, I remember a time in 7th grade when Osa and I got into a fight because I didn't put the orange juice back in the right spot on the shelf in the refrigerator. Something as minute as that, it sounds crazy, but in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense. Like, there was two things Osa always say to me. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Be greater than your parents. Go further. Surpass your accomplishments. If he has 3 saves with X amount of dollars, shoot for 6 saves with X amount of dollars. It all correlates. Going back to the juice, excellence in all you do. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Paying attention to your surroundings, the things like that. These were the lessons that he was trying to teach me in that. In that moment, I was like, dude, it's just orange juice in the fridge. Why does this even matter? Like, but I get it now. When I went to military school, I graduated top of my class. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. The structure, all the things that he did, it taught me structure for life that I didn't catch, or that I can't say that I would have gotten had I just been raised with just my mother. Or cleaning. Also used to have me sweeping and mopping every day. You swept every day, and then you mop every other day. We had wood floors. I thought it was crazy. I get it. I have floors like that, so it has to be done. Like, it taught you a regimen to keep yourself in line, in order. And it was crazy then. As far as having kids goes, for me, I'm gonna have to go with no. That's a strong no for the time being, only because in dealing with my nephew, I saw where my patience level stands. I know there's never a right time for children, but right now, if I was to have kids, I don't think that would work out too well for anyone, because there's a certain level of patience that you have to have in dealing with children. And if you don't know yourself fully, like, I'm still growing, if you don't know yourself fully, how can you pass something on to someone else? As far as the effect of not having a father as opposed to having one, I didn't realize the damage of my father not being there damage was being done until way later in life. I was an adult, and it got to a point where it's like, why do I feel this need for acceptance all the time? And it took me sitting back with it and realizing, like, this need for acceptance, or this subconscious need for acceptance, comes from my father not being there. It's like, well, why weren't you here? Like, why didn't you like me? Why wasn't I accepted? To the point where I made it a thing to try to make myself acceptable to everyone, which for a long time kind of hindered my growth in figuring out who I was as a person. Because if you're constantly trying to appease everyone else, how can you figure out who you are as a person? And once I figured that out, it kind of hit me, and I was like, okay. And I was in the military. I was like 23 at the time when I had this realization. And I immediately hit up Osa, and I was like, I think I need to talk to Osa more. Let me pick his brain a little bit more, since now that I see what he was doing and why he was doing it, why it makes sense. Like, I know even though I don't want kids, I'm sure you asked Osa when he was my age, he probably didn't want kids either. And look how this ended up. So I know with time, anything is possible and it could happen. I could very well find myself in my dad's same situation. And I would rather be a little bit more prepared. So I think I'm waiting on the whole kids aspect of it. I haven't quite picked his brain fully yet to say that I'm ready for that venture, and I think that pretty much touches on everything that I wanted to.
It all was about wanting you to be the very best person you possibly could be. And that is why I say today, I'm very proud of you, because you've gone beyond what I wanted for you. I'm always watching. I watch everyone all the time. That's what I did as a kid. I was a listener and a watcher. I wasn't a talker like I am now. And watching you over the years, man, you have really blessed me to see how you've handled and managed what you didn't know, what you know. And I'll never forget the day you came home from Germany and you said, you know what? I finally got what you was trying to tell me. And I cracked up, It's like, yeah, man, time takes time. I did not know my dad at all. I suspect that my dad left somewhere around the age of 2. And I did not meet up with my dad again until I was in my 40s. And it was a really, really bad experience for me. So I had a stepdad, and that was a result of my mom marrying. What are the 3 most important things you got from your dad? How to save money, how to fix things, and how to buy a car, which may seem kind of strange, but those were important things for me and that I utilize today. I love fixing things. I call Home Depot the big boys toy store, and I definitely work on saving money. That is something that I learned. I've talked to my grandson about that, especially when we was going to a store here in the US called Toys R Us, and it didn't exist back then, and he wanted, every time we passed by it, he wanted to go in and buy stuff, and I was like, no. So I taught him the reality of something costs $20, how long a person would have to work. And he was like 3 years old. How long did a person have to work to get that $20 to be able to buy something in Toys R Us? So learning about money was very, very important. What are 3 things I would have liked from my dad? And I'm not talking about my stepdad, because that's insignificant about my blood father. To come to my swim meets, to have called me son, to talk at me, not at me, and to tell me what men were like and what he was like. I was afraid of my father, and that was part of the reason why I did not talk. I did not talk from probably 3rd grade. I didn't talk. I was a watcher and a listener. I watched people and I listened to everything that people said, but I was not a conversationalist. I just didn't talk. The first time that I recognized that I talked was actually in my advanced training in the armed forces in the Army, when a girlfriend quit me and I got upset on the phone and I must have screamed or said something. And we all used to sit out in this long hallway and shine our boots for the next morning. We had to spit shine them for the next morning because every day they got muddied and dirty. So we had to spit shine them for inspection the next morning. And the phone was down at the end, and everybody in the hallway stopped and looked at me at the phone. And I was like, well, why are they looking at me? And one guy, when I got off the phone, he says, man, that's the first time I ever heard you talk. And I went back to my room upset, and a guy came into my room who turned out to be a good friend. And he said, that's the first time I've heard you talk. You need to share what you feel. You just blew up, but you need to share what you feel, what you're going through, and what you're thinking. Talk to people and let people know how you really feel. So that was kind of the beginning of it, but it didn't really manifest until about 4 years later when I was in college, and I was actually in my junior year of college is when I actually began to talk. So I was never really a talker. So to have my dad would have been nice to have him to talk to me. Do I have children? Not that I know of, but in reflection of my behavior, I might have impregnated a woman and not know. And the reason why I have to say that is because my first wife left me on the day of our 1 year anniversary and had an abortion. And that evening, I attempted to take my life by taking a bottle full of pills that did not kill me, but put me in a coma for 2 days. And as a result of my feelings at that time, I dated and had sex with 32 women in 1 year. And just by numbers and the amount of times I had unprotected sex, there is a possibility I have a child that I have absolutely no knowledge of. And that's just the reality of that. I've always wanted children. I've always wanted to see them grow, to hold them, to feed them, to change their diapers. And I was blessed to have that opportunity when my grandson was born. I was the second person to see him right after birth. Before his mom saw him, actually, I was in that room, and I was there when the nurse came in and gave him his very first bath, when he opened his eyes, when he cried, when she put the blankets over him, and then eventually woke up his mother and put him in her arms. I pretty much took care of my grandson for the first year and a half, sometimes having him 12 to 24 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. I was the first one to see him crawl, the first one to see him walk, the first one to hear him call out. He called me Grandpa before he said mommy or daddy. I was the first one to feed him. His first meal was yogurt. I gave him some vegetarian yogurt. And then eventually I weaned him into tofu, which he loves, and other things. My son got him into eating frog's legs. But anyway, so I had that experience of a child, what it's like to have a baby. But the thing that really is the big point for me with having a child is I am the end of my line. There are no other sons. There is no one else with my kin name, Griffin. So when I die, my lineage is over and in my heart. I know said this to me hundreds of times that, you know, you have children, be it the ones that you worked with in schools or the ones that you've mentored throughout the years or that you've built friendships with. You have people in your life that you can call sons and daughters. However, I don't have a blood child. And in my heart, it feels as if I never existed, because that's the end of Griffin. There are no more. There's nowhere, anywhere to say this person existed beyond the fact that I am on some printed document as an obituary. There is no living organism that continues. I don't have any blood children. I don't have a daughter. So even if I had a daughter, she starts with my name, but then she doesn't have my name afterwards if she gets married. So there is some kind of lineage there, but I don't have any of that. So it has been a big deal for me to have children. I love children. I love children. So that's been a biggie for me, and I'm still working with that. What would I like to teach a son or daughter, when and if I had one? To love God totally, to love their mom and me, to love their siblings, to wait until marriage before they have sex, how to save and spend money wisely, to go after their dreams, for the boys to respect women, and for the girls to respect men, to travel, to not be prejudiced against people who are different, to not be angry, to not be arrogant, to be humble, to be givers, and to be happy. And it is really, really, really important in regards to respect. A couple of years, maybe about 3 or 4 years after having dated 32 women, it only lasted 1 year because I met this cab driver and the two of us talked, and we realized that we were both in a similar situation where our wives had just left us, and we were both kind of like running, just basically having all of these female relationships that had nothing to do with other than sex. And we both agreed to stop. And about 3 or 4 years later, I called up all of the women that I had ever dated, and I apologized. And it was at that point that I began to realize the level of disrespect I had towards them, but further than that, the disrespect that I had towards their future husbands. Because reality is that when we're in relationships and they don't end well, we carry that with us. And it comes as baggage, and it can affect a future relationship, which means whatever I did or did not do in the relationships that I was with those 32 women was carried with them. And I was not around, would not be around to see the negative impact of my behavior with these women. So I apologize to their husbands in absence. I apologize to them. I apologize to their children, even if they didn't have children, because the reality was that what I did could definitely have a negative impact on them, because I didn't show love except for how to get you to have sex with me. So that was a biggie for me. What did you learn from your mom? To be honest, to be humble, to be a giver, to engage in sports, to go to church, to tell the truth, and always look for truth. I've said this over and over and over again. It's difficult growing up without a father. It's even more difficult being a father having never been a son. Let me say that again. It's hard growing up not having your dad. But it's even more difficult being a father having never been a son because you didn't have a father. Because you got to figure out everything. I want to thank each one of you men for being so transparent. One of the things that I really, really want out of these seminars is for everyone to feel so safe, so relaxed that they can share things. And that's why I said that there are things that we men hold on to based on the politics, which could be the structure we live in, the things we have been given to work with, or our own personality, what we're digesting, the politics of our own mind, that prevents us from being open with women especially. Because the bottom line, based on how we saw fertilization, development of the embryo, men need women, women need men. The reality of I can do it alone, this oneness, this self-centeredness, kind of selfish, I call it a sense of arrogance where I don't need anybody, is ridiculous. It's a non-existent entity. There is no way that we can exist alone. Everybody right now is in a house or someplace, a dwelling. To think that we could live on an island, already there's an island. That's two parts. To think that you could survive on an island without shelter, what if it rains? What if it doesn't rain? Then there's sun. Well, what if there's no sun or rain? There's wind. You need shelter. So that's at least two things there. Are you going to go on a fast for the term that you exist on this island? Fasting is only good for so long. At some point in time, you're going to look for a coconut tree, at least. Or you might have been a vegetarian, but now you're on an island and there are no fruits except for coconuts. Coconuts will only go but so far. You might find yourself being a person that eats fish. So you go out, figure out how to get a forked piece of wood and spear fish. So the reality is we need more than one of anything to be, to survive, to grow, and to have children.